Hi, everybody. If people could take their seats so we can start back up, that would be terrific. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We're going to try and start on schedule. It's 1:15. Hope everybody's been enjoying the day so far. My name is Randy Siegel. I'm the vice chair of the AFCEA DC Mobile Working Group. Happy to be working with Randy Clark and all these other good folks. I see, lots of, familiar faces in the crowd, which is always the case. So now I have, the nice distinction of introducing a productivity panel entitled Improving Productivity Through Mobile Applications. And leading that productivity panel is Major General Robert Wheeler. General Wheeler is the Deputy Chief Information Officer, Command and Control Communications, Computers, and Information Infrastructure Capabilities with the Department of Defense. So if everyone could join me in welcoming General Wheeler.
Okay, good afternoon. I understand I'm the first person after lunch today, so that should be pretty exciting. So let's see. The room's not filled up too much, so it won't be too exciting. I'll try to keep this a little bit more fun. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit on the mobility piece. And this is very important from both an industry and from a DoD perspective. Do we have it right? That's why I want to walk out here. And where do we not have it right? And where do we have it right? So those are the kind of perspectives I need to know where to go forward with what we're doing in the next few years here, because this is critical to DoD, because I think if you understand this, where we're going to go with mobility, you'll understand that this is not just about business processes here. This is about all the way to the tactical edge and into the tactical edge. So we have to make sure that we understand what we're talking about, all the way from an office to combat and in combat as well. And that's what mobility is all about. And we're trying to do three main things when we talk about mobility. We're trying to jump the productivity curve. And how do I quantify that, folks? How do I quantify? I know it's there. I can feel it, okay? And I can see it every single day, but how do I jump the productivity curve? I want it to cost less overall. How would I do something like that? Well, I'm talking about replacing your desktop systems. Like on my desktop today, if you look into my office, I have 3 different classification systems. I have a NIPR, I have a SIPR, and I have a JWICS. Each one of them have their own associated box associated with that. Why do I have to have that? Why is that there? Think about the literally millions of those boxes out there. What if I replace that with a tablet with multi-capabilities in there, going from NIPR all the way to JWICS? Maybe at first I have to have it with just one of the classification levels and have 3. But still, I'm saving a grand sum of money. So we talked about productivity. We also talked about cost. And the last one is security. What is the right level of security? Security has to move with the threat. That's the bottom line to it. So that is the defining metric, if you will, in there. That's more difficult to quantify to get right to it. But it has to be understood that it's designed on the threat, not necessarily on the acquisition program. So the acquisition program will build up, this is my metric. Well, the threat gets a vote in this particular piece. So we have to look at it from that particular perspective. So what we're trying to do is jump the productivity curve. Again, save the costs, because we want to be able to plow that money back into combat capabilities. And again, folks, this is about your sons and daughters, if you will, your families, and what we put folks into combat. And we have to give them the best capabilities out there at the most cost-effective rate so that we can take care of the combat arena, make us more productive in the combat arena, at the same time save costs so we can plow this into other systems. So that's the perspective that we look at mobility, and we look at this as a true combat enabler, okay? A true capability to enable us in the combat arena. And we have taken this mobility piece, which was purely at first about business systems, and we realized very quickly, and it wasn't just always the folks in the hallowed halls of OSD. It was a lot about the young airmen, if you will, the young Marines, the young soldiers out there, and the young naval folks at the particular locations using these particular tools, using the smartphones in ways that we hadn't even thought about in the past. So I would like you to draw into those when we get to the question section here. And how we're going to run this panel then is I'm going to introduce each one of these guys at a time here, and then I'm going to let them give a 5-minute blurb and get them talk about this, and then we're going to drive into it. By the way, they all suggested, since it's after lunch, I would start off with some OPM jokes, and I decided I wouldn't do that. And so if there's anybody from OPM here, I'm sorry, but it's been a painful day with you guys. Okay, I'll just leave it at that. But in any event, before we go forward, I'd like to make sure that everybody understands what we're trying to do. We need to get better at this. We need to know and partner with you. We believe in the public-private partnership. We believe that you are part of the solution. We believe in capitalism at the right cost. We also believe that we need to go forward at this, and we're not going fast enough. Fact, we're not going fast enough. And we need to do it as fast as we can and as simple as we can, given the numbers that we have, and at the right capability that can grow with our needs across the board. So as Mr. Halverson's talked about this morning, we are the biggest single user out there. So that's who we are out there from the size. And if you look at us from an enterprise perspective and you start to look at it, to think about it from an enterprise perspective and who DoD is, if you think from a business side, once DoD takes off on something, the rest of the interagency does too. And typically, the rest of the Five Eyes does. And in fact, this September, we're going to have a Five Eyes CIO conference, for example, and those particular groups will be in the same room. So if you can think, they're thinking the same solution sets that we are. So we're thinking about mobility in unclassified, secret, and top secret realms. All these other countries are there. So those solutions that we come together with and come for us not only work from our perspective, but also for the interagency, all the way through the White House, as well as the Five Eyes. So think that through when you're asking your questions today. With that, I'll start off with the first one here, and I guess he's sitting next to me here. Mr. Del Grosso is going to talk first. He'll spend a second here on giving a little bit about his background, a bit of a speech, and then we'll go forward from there. Please.
Do you want us sitting down or standing up?
You can. I can't sit.
Can we do something with the lights? I don't know if this is a simulated virtualization mobility kind of thing, and I can't see anybody, but anyway, I'll stand a little bit. I'll just focus on the guy in the blue shirt in the middle. So as General Wheeler said, I'm Dan Del Grosso. I'm the technical director for Navy PEO EIS. So we own all of the enterprise shore overseas networks. We obviously work closely with our counterpart on the afloat side, PEO C4I. I am the IPT chair for the Navy Mobility Enterprise IPT. So we have a lot of fleet representation from both afloat, ashore, tactical, non-tactical environments. We have the fleet commanders and the operational commander on board with that as well. And I'll talk about that in a second, but what I want to make sure that you all understand, some of you may already be aware, is that at least inside the Department of the Navy, and I think it probably goes the same with DoD at large, is we're way behind in the world of mobility. It's only been within the last year, really, that we've really picked up some momentum in that field. I think it's because senior leadership is engaged. They understand the criticality of this. They understand that this is where the world is going, not just within DoD, but in the commercial world as well. So we're trying to pick up some steam in that regard. You hear a lot, depending on who you talk to inside the Navy, and you all are industry, so you go knocking on the doors, trying to talk to people about your different solutions, whether it's mobility or not. And you'll hear senior leadership, you'll hear technical directors and CIOs and others talk about mobility as if we really, really, truly understand where the Navy needs to go. And I'm here to tell you we don't. We don't have that roadmap yet. So one of the things that Admiral Branch, who you will hear this afternoon, tasked the IPT with is to write the mobility strategy for the department. And we have to do that because we have to understand the end game. Where is it that we want to go? Do I want an iPhone on NMCI, our largest network? Sure, but why? I have a BlackBerry. I had a BlackBerry 6 years ago, I think, when we started. And I was able to send and receive email. I was able to go to secure websites. I was able to digitally sign and encrypt. I now have an iPhone. Guess what I can do with this? Not as much as I can do with the BlackBerry right now. So why did we go to the iPhone? It's a good question.
That's under BlackBerry, so that's the other thing. We have diversity.
That's understanding the end game and the environment that we want to be in. We have to take that step with smartphone technology in order to get to where we really want to be, and that is basically transparency between what we can do in our own personal life with the phone and all the functionality that goes along with it, and to what extent can we use that same functionality inside the lifelines of the Navy. There's security issues with that, there's legality issues with that, but the bottom line is we need to get there. We're signing an IATT for Droid this month. We're going to start deploying some of those devices as well. I think by the end of this summer, we'll have probably in the neighborhood of 30,000 users with iPhones on NMCI. So that's a significant start for us. On the afloat side, it's a little bit different story. As with anything else that we install on the afloat side, it deals a lot with availability of the ship and the C4I interoperability issues that go along with installing. So when you take scheduling, which is a lot longer time period for a ship versus just going to a shore command and doing the install, it's night and day. So we're working with the Canes folks to try to understand where they need to go. Their current environment is they're on BES 5. So BES 5 is end of life. They're moving to BES 12 over the next year and a half. So that's where they're at. So as industry partners, as you're coming to us for solutions, you need, as Mr. Halverson said today, you need to do your homework, understand current state of play. I just kind of gave it to you. We're just taking baby steps right now with smartphone technology and mobility. The strategy that we are writing, that it will be on Admiral Branch's desk on the 1st of August, here's the bumper sticker. Access to information anytime, any place, from any device. That includes BYOD. My position, Admiral Branch's position, you'll hear it this afternoon, is the same as Terry Halverson's position. We support BYOD to a certain extent. There will be appropriateness for BYOD, and that's yet to be determined. And there are some environments within Navy that it absolutely will not be appropriate to do that. We're not going to stipend, so we have to look at that case study and see where that's appropriate to do. So there will be flavors of BYOD at some point. Some points there won't be. And then the other bumper sticker in the strategy is wireless by default, wired by exception. You heard Terry Halverson talk today about Wi-Fi, and we need to expand on that. We're doing it in the Pentagon. We need to do it elsewhere. That's the frame of mind we have to build a truly mobile environment. So current state of play for Navy, looking forward to your questions here in a little bit after the other speakers give their spiel, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Mr. Candolini, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, General Wheeler. So I'd like to start off by starting with a little bit of history. As we all know, Napoleon came up with the famous phrase, an army moves on its stomach. Well, I think if he were alive today, he'd change that phrase, and he'd say, an army, or in this case the military, moves on information. You can't get that food to that soldier unless you manage information, right? It's much more important than even food. So let's take a look at what's happening in information. Information and mobility are intricately linked together. And mobility is about gathering information and distributing information in ways that we've never done before. We know that we can save lives by getting information to the right place at the right time. Now, back in June, there was a seminar by Google called Google I/O. And in that, they introduced an application called Google Photos. You should try it out if you have a chance. It's pretty interesting. And what this did was it let people put all these photos in, and it would categorize them. So you could look up a person and see what they looked like when they were even 6 months old if you had pictures of them, right? It's incredible neural technology they've used and a deep learning network they've built. So let me give you a crazy example about information. Let's say that we in the future decided that all our 1.4 million enlisted men, at the time they enlisted and got their dog tags, we'd give them a smartphone, $300 a piece, every one of them, for their personal use. Now, why would we do that? Well, because as these enlisted men walk around and they know something about security and safety, and they're in many, many parts of the world, they're going to take pictures. They're going to take pictures of all kinds of interesting things. They may take pictures of things relevant to their job. They may take pictures of things that seem innocuous, but maybe could be relevant later on. We spend $75 billion on intelligence services. That's the intelligence budget per year. So if we gave 1.4 million phones out at $300 a phone, that's $420 million. And we would get an amazing amount of photographs coming back from all these individuals. We could, over time, gather a huge database about what's going on out there. I mean, it's so hard to get information out of all these things that are all these laws. But here we have enlisted men that have a duty to serve the country, and it would be collecting all these items. So there's a really quick and dirty application. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but there's a great example of where information is far more valuable than the hardware itself or the storage you're going to take. It would dramatically change the intelligence services just having those 1.4 million people gathering information. And yeah, they might lose it, but remember, every day they get issued a weapon, and they have to take good care of that, so they can take good care of their smartphones. You just have to make it part of the job requirement. Thanks.
Mr. Steve Zabel.
Hi, my name's Steve Zabo. I'm here representing Verizon, and my current role there is Executive Director of Device Technology, representing the product development wing, so hopefully we'll get good information from here that we can take back and partner up. So what are we interested in from a device management perspective, and that's how I'm looking at it. What I'm excited about is I'm hearing good news. It sounds like we're introducing new operating systems into the ecosystem and stuff like that we can take advantage of and look across the base of how are they going to use these devices and how do I take advantage of those things. What I'm excited about is those same devices that we're talking about having access to information anytime, anywhere today is what's going to be the new definition of a device 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And I think that's what I'm most interested in. How do I stay ahead of the game there? Because I feel like a lot of what folks are using today, which is your traditional devices to access information, those are going to become the tools that are actually directing what will be the future of devices down the road, especially when you get out to the front lines and you're talking about sensors and biometrics and analytics and getting that data into the cloud, being able to manipulate that data so you can make real-time decisions, and all those things will most likely be happening from tablets and smartphones. And then, how is that stuff going to be secure? How do I manage that information? And then, of course, as you kind of move down the pipe there, it's, all right, what do the folks in the field need? How am I locking down which devices can talk to which devices and secure that type of information and correspondence back and forth? I think that the other thing that I'm really looking forward to, and I heard Mr. Halverson talk about partnerships, and if you kind of just took a very simple mindset that, hey, of the big players, 75% of them can bring the type of technology we need to help drive the DoD and what they're trying to do. How do we partner with that other 25%, which is going to help speed things up? Because as we start working with folks in the Valley, the talent of the app developers, you're talking there'll be 25 million plus applications that'll be in use by 2020. And these are things that are going to be making decisions, needing access to data in the cloud. How am I using that? How am I restricting it? And the key is going to be is what level of trust for folks in this room and industry and in the government space are they willing to settle on so they can take advantage of that type of information. I think it's real exciting because it drives into not only productivity and efficiency and budget, but you start getting into healthcare and some of these things where, that's where some of the real advances, in my opinion, in technology are going to take place, and it would be a shame if we don't figure out a way to actually take advantage of that so that we can move forward and really drive forward with the type of technology that we can take advantage of. So.
Great. Very good. Steve Stevenson, please. Go ahead.
Yep. Hi, my name is Steve Stephenson, and I'm going to stand up because it's hard for me to sit down that long, too, sir.
Me too.
So I'm a neurologist. I have one of the best missions, I think, in the Department of Defense, and then I get to take care of the service members and their families who serve the mission, the larger mission of the Department of Defense. And but my title, and the reason why I'm up here on the stage today, is I'm the newly inaugurated Chief of Innovation for the Military Health System. So what does that mean? It means a lot of things to a lot of different people, and it's not just about the technology piece. There's a lot of CIO crowd in the audience, obviously, today, but a lot of times innovation is not about the technology so much. It's about a policy thing, and we've heard some of that earlier today, too. The military health system encompasses 10 million beneficiaries. It's larger than the Department of Veterans Affairs. It's roughly 9.5 or so. And of that, only 20% wear a uniform. So you're looking at the people that we care for in the military health system are the spouses, the children, the retirees, and I imagine a large percentage of the people in this room are beneficiaries of either DoD or veteran health care. And so one of the questions that differentiates a little bit about what we've been talking about here today is that although I am in a CIO crowd, I imagine that there are a few people in the audience today who have a real legitimate need to have combat situational awareness on their mobile phone. That doesn't apply to the majority of people on a daily basis. And yet healthcare, I would venture to guess if I polled the audience right now and said how many people have access to some information about health on their personal mobile device right now, I would imagine everybody in the room would probably either say, I have accessed healthcare information on a mobile device, have my personal information on healthcare on my mobile device, or my family's healthcare. And so I'm stuck into a position where mobility for me is no longer about mobile devices. Mobile devices are out there, they're being used for the purposes of healthcare already. How we help augment that with relevant information for the patients to make more informed decisions is sort of one of my roles. But to sort of talk about what my colleague at Verizon was sort of saying is that extending the concept of what we even mean by mobility is one of my jobs too, is to start to challenge some of these notions of what we mean by mobile health. Mobile health is not about a particular device. It's where healthcare comes to you. You no longer go to healthcare. It used to be that the only way in order for you to get health or healthcare information was for you to go visit your physician. You go and get healthcare. You physically get in your car and you drive the Beltway and you park in a parking lot somewhere and you wait 20 minutes for your appointment to see me for 20 minutes in a 10 by 10 room, and then you go wait in a pharmacy in a lab somewhere for another 20 minutes, and then you drive home. How much time did I as a physician get to influence your health and health behaviors? 20 minutes to 30 minutes? 5 times a year on average in the health and in health affairs. So that's 100 minutes a year that I have to influence your health. So the bigger question is, where does health happen? Health doesn't happen in that 10 by 10 exam room. Healthcare happens, but health doesn't necessarily happen. You don't come to me healthy. You don't come to me. In fact, in our notes, when I write a neurology note on a patient that comes to see me at Walter Reed, for those who are aware or familiar with the healthcare industry, the first thing I write in my note is CC. That stands for chief complaint. That's what we're taught, right? So what is the chief reason that you're coming in to see me? So where does health happen? Health happens in what we call the life space. It's where you work, live, play, and pray, right? And so what am I doing as the head of innovation in the healthcare vertical to try to access and augment that information that you're already taking advantage of in the life space? And for me, that's what mobility is. Mobility is much more about healthcare coming to you and how can I help augment that. In many ways, the Chaplain Corps has more access to influence your health behaviors than I do as a physician at Walter Reed. And so we need to acknowledge that and then figure out ways that mobility can actually help us to do that. The other sort of gets into the device and sensor sort of arena is that what we've seen traditionally over the history of the term innovation, and I give talks on that too, it used to be this sort of interstellar, out there innovation were things that were changing the paradigm for religious doctrine back in the 1500s. And then it slowly became, in the turn of last century, more about the technology. Industrial Revolution happened, and it's all about the technology around us, and GPS. You can sort of fast forward into the latter part of the last century. But now it's actually becoming much more internal and introspective and self-reflective, and it's the sensors that we wear, it's the smart pills that we swallow that interface with these mobile devices and give us information about how to better care for your health and healthcare. It's no longer about me managing your disease, it's about me managing your health, which is how it should be in the first place. Prevent you from coming to see me in the first place, right? Put me out of a job. That's why I love health, that's why I love medicine. So with that, I want to, there's a little bit of a difference in terms of the role that I'm playing in the healthcare market. It tends to be a much more permissive environment for mobility, particularly in all of our lanes of care, by the way. So I focused a lot now on sort of what I would consider the community area of health and the health mission that we have. But obviously we have the combat medic arena too. We make medics, that's what we do, right? So what are we doing to support tactical combat casualty care? Do I really need to lock down information on malaria preventative measures? You know, and is that acceptable? Because it's already out there. You can download 5 apps on malaria preventative measures. The problem is it hasn't been looked at by our malaria experts to say, is it valid for our guys to be using downrange? In the absence of anything else, that's what they're using. And then in the global health range too, we have a lot of global health medical stability operation exercises that we do all over the world. Ebola being sort of one of the examples where we were involved most recently, but we were involved in Haiti and Japan and Joint Task Force Bravo in Honduras. I can go on and on with some of the things that we do, where mobility actually has played a role in things like translation and how do we help with vaccine distribution and testing, cold chain transport of different trials that we're doing. So really trying to extend that concept of mobility and trying to recognize that healthcare may be actually a very unique, sort of to your point too, I think, market within the DoD space, where some of these problems that we're encountering around distribution of information in complex no-com, low-com environments could actually be tested in a much more permissive way. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Okay, good. Let's start off with the questions. I get the first question, and then we'll go from there. So it's what I talked about before. I'll open it up to the crew here. What is DoD doing right, and what does DoD need to do more of in the future from a mobility perspective? I'd like to open it up kind of to the industry open side there first, because I think that's more important to come from them, because you need to tell us where we're screwing up and where we're not. I think that's important, and what we could do faster from an overall perspective. So with that, I open it up to you, and if you want to think about it for a minute, I can continue to talk, or I'll open it up to Ken and Steve, whichever one you want to pop with.
I've got some concepts here.
Okay.
You know, I've traveled around to the various defense agencies. I can tell you they've all got drawers of applications they could do in mobility. It's not a question of ideas.
Okay.
They got tons of them. But it always comes down to one particular thing. I can't do this because I don't understand what security requirements I have. Got one group telling me this, another one telling me this. It's inconsistent. I don't know what to do, so I do nothing. So what's happened here is I think we've used kind of, to borrow one of my compatriots' ideas, this fort mentality of how we deal with security is that if you're inside, you're good. If you're outside, you're bad. We've used this mentality sort of as time has gone, and it hasn't changed. And yet, the openness of the mobile area, the consumer area, has gotten way ahead of us. So we have a pretty secure environment, but we're way behind in applications.
Sure.
So we've got to bridge those two things together. And I think, you know, fundamentally it comes down to one thing from my perspective. The problem is we believe that there is something that we can build that we can trust. A long time ago, well, you know, let's say it's about 6 or 7 years ago, at Gartner we were confronted with the issue of BYOD. Mm-hmm. When I look at a BYOD device, what is it about it? It's not trusted. Here I am trying to take this untrusted device, because they have a right to give it to their kids, and how do I use it in business, right? It's a real challenge. So we began to think of different ways, and you were talking about mobile device management. Mobile device management figured it out. What they did was they put this encrypted bubble on top of untrusted hardware called a container, and they figured out how to do it. And that's the common method that's used today. Or they keep everything on the back end over the net. Sure. So they figured out how to do it. So I think what we have to do here is we have to go to bed tonight and wake up tomorrow assuming that all the infrastructure we have in place is untrusted, right? And when you do that, although it's never going to be that way, I understand it, it makes you think differently. It makes you think about security differently. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, we have to protect the applications. We can't have these walled garden environments. And then the other thing that has to be done here is when these people ask me about security, they don't know where to go. They can't find something. We need some security czar that can publish a matrix which says, here's 25 use cases from a recruiter who wants to get on Facebook to somebody who's on the battlefield that needs absolute security. Then we have to put down all these standards that the military's developed. And we got to fill in the boxes. Okay. So they can go to this chart and say, oh, I'm one of these. This is what I need. So these applications I can do, and these I can't, right? Okay. And they're missing that, and they're confused, and they can't do anything.
Okay. Steve, before I hand it over to you, I'd like to make one comment to add to this, because this is a really interesting topic if you drill down one layer. Okay, what does DoD have? A lot of legacy systems. If you go to other countries in the world where they're just laying new fiber, they can do a lot of different things because they don't have those legacy systems. We also have, and I'll use the word, and this will touch on some touchiness here, tribes within the U.S. DoD, okay? So DoD has Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, okay? If you have that particular aspect, plus the civilian aspect and combat agencies, okay? Each of those have a authorization from a network perspective in many cases. So what he's also getting at potentially, is an enterprise solution to this, an enterprise solution look across this. Is this like the telephone of yesterday, where you should just be able to pick up, you don't care who does it, you just pick up the phone and it should work. That's what we do today. But your services are going to guard their particular networks because they don't want to have a ubiquitous enterprise level network because they lose money at that particular point. And then from a Verizon perspective, you have to only go to one provider, and that's going to cut down their costs because they got better buying power. So from that particular perspective, they're not going to like it. And the services won't because you're touching their territory. Although when I'm sitting up there, even I'm wearing the Air Force piece, I see that as the way of the future. I already see that happening. So that actually gets to his security aspect to it. How far we go, that'll be the question that we go down to the road. But he's absolutely correct about the security aspect of it.
I might add one more thing. Even when you buy a device for somebody, many times they're putting personal things on it.
Right.
So that's compromised.
Right.
And we're going to public networks like Starbucks. So if you think about it, more and more things are becoming untrusted.
Right. So you can talk about it from both the application and, of course, the data at that point. Steve, go.
Yeah, so when I think about, I think one of the things that are going right is that you're adopting the other systems, and when you do that, I think it opens up the door for other app providers and stuff to be more apt to provide the type of support you guys would need, and then it's interoperable across the whole base from an app to operating system perspective. One of the things I found interesting, we were talking a little bit, you mentioned the walled garden, and I keyed on to what you were saying is if your number one goal is information from anywhere, anytime, any place, one of the things I see us run into is, and we offer cloud services and stuff like that, is there's a real restriction on where this data can reside, and I think it limits the opportunity to develop the type of technology required to have access to that information, because it ends up really complicating the architecture and stuff, and then you get into, all right, well, there's a lot of cloud companies out there. You got a lot of operating systems out there. You got a lot of companies that want to store information. You got a lot of app people that want to store stuff in segregated areas. And so how does the military take advantage of all this information? If everything is always required to go back into the walled garden, I don't know how realistic it is to think that all the parties involved are going to have the firepower to help out, are going to be able to get you the type of technology you need to take advantage of it.
And that's why, at least on the Navy side, Admiral Branch directed and pushed very hard to get the smartphone technology out of AFCEA, because we were being overly cautious. We work with NSA, we work with Fleet Cyber Command, we understand the vulnerabilities, but what it really boils down to is get it on the network, even though it doesn't have full functionality at this time, it pushes us to the next level. So here's where we're falling short. We need to come to a consensus, DoD-wide, with industry's help. And going back to Terry Halverson's comment today, how secure is secure enough? Because that affects how we manage our applications as well, and how we get access to that vital information through those specific applications that we need to fulfill our mission. So, when I was in Silicon Valley with Terry Halverson a year and a half ago, when I still worked for him, the question was this: how much more secure am I, from a mobility perspective or not, regardless, how much more secure am I using CAC PKI versus password, user ID, soft cert, whatever the case may be? How are we doing identification access management today? We spend an awful lot of money on CAC PKI, but nobody, including our industry partners, can give us a definitive answer. Here's how much more secure you are.
Exactly.
Okay, if you take BlackBerry inside the Navy, and I don't think it's to anybody's surprise, 99.99% of the population had the BlackBerry, and yes, we had, you heard me mention earlier, we had the ability to browse securely, digitally sign and encrypt. But that was if we used the CAC reader with it. That is not user-friendly, everybody knows that, and it was a nuisance to carry them both around. So what did? We do typically what any good sailor does. We find a workaround and we take the easy way out. So we basically were using it in the clear, right? So the concern there is, okay, well, that's going to up your chances of having a phishing attempt. To show me the statistics on our largest network inside DoD. The majority of the 22,000 users on BlackBerry, I guarantee you 99% of them weren't using CAC PKI. And accessing whatever it was that we needed access. Show me the result of that in a bad way if there was a denial of service. So it goes back to the question. We need to come to a consensus with industry and DoD. How secure is secure enough? That opens the environment to what we can do in terms of functionality, accessing the vital information on those apps, and moving forward in that direction. There's got to be a balance.
And I might add a couple more things to it. I mean, I agree with you 100%. We got to look at security as a probabilistic thing, not as an absolute thing. I mean, I find too many times people are trying to say, well, they could get through this path or that path or whatever. You're never going to find all the paths, right? So you got to really use what we call context-based identity. You got to look at who's coming in, what they're trying to get access, gather all the information you can about it, and make a determination whether you want to do it. Best example I can give you now, we all have banking applications. We take pictures of checks, and yet the bank will take that. Well, I know I could print a check on my printer, right? They'll tell you that if you can send a napkin through an ATM, they'll take it. So how do they move money? They do a whole bunch of calculations based on what they know about this event, everything else, about 1,000 context variables, and they say, this is probably a good transaction, I'm going to make it, right? And I think that's the future of security, is it cannot be absolute. If you figure all these paths, the hacker will find a path you didn't figure out.
So before I give it over to Dr. Steve, let me make one other comment. When you think about security, most of the folks in here are talking about, when they're thinking of the examples, of the NIPR side, which is our unclassified side. Remember, we have a classified, secure, secret side. So for example, I use a commercial phone right now today from Samsung for my secret phone calls and for my secret email. And I have that, and I have encryption based in there. NSA-based encryption, commercial-based encryption, actually, with NSA's help. On that particular phone, I use that commercial application. But that's a different level of security, and that has a different implication than the check transaction does there. And there's the TS side, which always has the grave consequences, severely grave consequences to our nation. On that particular side, the top secret side. And that's where I as a user, spend almost my whole day. I seldom ever touch the unclassified side. And I'm trying to do this in mobility, too. I'm not doing this on a desktop, too. So I spend most of my day, and a lot of users do this, either in the TS side or, in many cases, the secure side, the secret side. So when you're thinking about mobility, don't forget that piece. And I'm here with the example of the BlackBerry that I used, the 30, that actually has soft certs in a container inside of it there, and those are all encrypted on my particular piece, and I never have to make any changes at all. So I also have another version that's Android-based, and I also have a third version that's Apple-based. So just as we test out these particular pieces. So that's out there as well. So Dr. Steve, did you want to add anything to that?
I just maybe to follow up on the how secure is secure enough. I mean, that's sort of the point I was trying to bring up as well, particularly with some of the content that we have. I used to joke, and the reason I got into the position I was, and I used to manage a health IT research portfolio for defense on active duty, and I used to joke and say I was the chair of the interim solution committee, because particularly in the healthcare industry, or healthcare field, if I'm going to be faced with somebody dying in front of me, by God, I'll find a way around whatever security restriction you put up in front of me to get the information I need. And so it really does come down to how secure is secure enough for the mission at hand. I think one of the things that we tend to get wrapped around the axle about in the health side that we don't do as well, perhaps, is this idea that we have to compete with everybody out there who's building health apps, and this idea of being cooperative versus competitive. And that's where really the industry can sort of help us in recognizing that a lot of times it's about collaboration, not competition. I don't need to necessarily own everything because I don't currently. Our patients are already using the infrastructures that are available on the outside. So just a better understanding of that, I think, is important. And then also there tends to be this focus inside the health vertical of of doing these things in the community space. But where DoD and health affairs can really provide the most benefit to our beneficiary population, the service members that we serve, is in the readiness component and in the global health and combat area. That is what we do. That's what we do better than anyone else is going to be able to do for us. And so that's where a lot of our emphasis should be focused when we're talking about some of the mobility needs, not necessarily on delivering the best diabetic app, for example, because that may be more of a cooperative kind of thing that we do with industry.
I want to open up the optic one more place here, just so everybody starts to think about it when you're bringing up these discussions. We do some things with mobility, if you will, that was young folks figuring it out. So if you think about the age group in this room, each of you, if you put yourself 10 years apart, are going to use a smartphone differently, okay? And that's very good, actually. So if you're in the 15, 16-year-old, use a phone a specific way. If you're in your 20s, use it a different way. If you're in your 30s, you do it differently. 40s and 50s and beyond. In fact, this BlackBerry that I've talked about twice here has no keys on it. I got a bunch of complaints in the hallway there because I was testing, and they go, it doesn't have any keys. And I said, okay, it's time for you to retire if you have to have keys, okay? And that's exactly what I said. We have the geriatric section where you have to have keys. So in any event, we need to move with technology. But what I'm trying to get to is we use electronic flight bag, for example, on airplanes, okay? So we're using both Android-based and Apple-based tablets to do all what I used to carry hundreds of pounds in some cases, in some airplanes, of actual publications for the aircraft. I used to be, it was like a temporary move when I went out to a B-2. I'm a B-2 pilot, okay? So when I go out to the stealth bomber, I would carry literally 60 pounds of paper shit, okay? All different classifications from TS to SAP, to Special Access Program. I mean, oh my God, the amount of potential for losing this stuff. Now, I carry it on a single particular piece, and I can move back and forth in that, and I can have a backup in there, and it's in the right light in the aircraft. I can get to it quickly. It saves me. In combat environments, I can move on some data very quickly. Young kid overseas used a smartphone to help him with a sniper scope. He put it on the end of his M4, okay? And he was whacking targets like nobody else. That's cool, okay? Another group of them, they were walking through different places, and they were taking pictures of bad guys. And they were building basically a collage, going back to the discussion of the Google picture piece. They built a collage. And then they figured out how to connect to Wi-Fi, some face recognition. Where is this dude-sicle? Where is he? Well, he's over in Ramadi, he's in Fallujah, he's in this place. He must be moving stuff. So they were able to build out networks. And then they were able to schwack the right guys. Okay, that's young kids figuring it out. That's the kind of stuff that I can provide the capability, but it's going to grow in a way that I don't know. And I'm okay with that. That's how the strategy has to be built. So when the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, who came to our office and goes, how do I put Pandora on my thing? I couldn't believe it. Okay, I go, you got to be kidding me. I say, no, it's not what I said, but you understand the words I probably used. And I go, Pandora? And so, but in any event, he did. He really wanted that. And he went to all the service academies and said, I need you to figure out how I can use this better to make us better, faster, stronger, and more capable. Because remember, we're not all about combat. We're about deterrence. We're trying to be the best force in the world so we never have to go to combat. So that's the important part of this, too, that leads us out to that next step. Okay, I've talked enough. I'm going to open it up to questions in this particular room. So I go forward, and they'll come through. Mark Norton up front, and shoot forward, please.
Okay, thank you, sir. So I guess this is to Steve and Ken and Dr. Steve. So what are the commercial mobile trends that you see being developed in large businesses or in the medical field that DoD should adopt in mobile?
So I'll start off with, if you look at the military, it's effectively a supply chain, right? Now, what happens underneath that supply chain is there's a set of computing applications we'll call a digital supply chain. Those elements of digital supply chain are often broken when things go mobile. So what business is doing today is they're adding mobile as a way of making that digital supply chain continuous. Now, we all know with supply chains, if we compress them, we use fewer assets, we get more reliability, everything gets better. It's easy for me to go into an organization that bases its productivity on supply chain and get money to do something. So that's the first place to go, is on this supply chain. Now, mobility also has another aspect. It reduces the turnaround time on exceptions. Our transactional systems are built on repeatable events. But we know in military the biggest problem we have is when things don't go as planned. And it happens a lot in your business, right? So the first application that people are putting in place to deal with this is collaboration. So if I was to do nothing more than to put on all the military devices a single collaboration system where I could do email, instant messaging, phone calls, video calls. So when something went wrong, I could get people on the line as quickly as possible and reduce that turnaround time on transaction. That's a big application for for commercial, for military, for anything. So I'd say that's where business is focusing today, is getting that right first. The other applications will follow, but fix that one up. There's huge productivity gains for the military in just doing that.
Example, B2. I put in a Dell laptop because we had to move very quickly in Afghanistan in 2001. I needed to move quickly. I didn't have the voice capability to go all over the world that quickly, and I had to move on a lot of data quickly. So what I did was we set up a chat, okay? So I set up a chat on my system. So what I had was actually Microsoft email. So Microsoft, then I get the email, Air Force, you got to have that. And so you get that particular piece of PowerPoint, but more importantly, I literally had all my data, and I could go back and forth between the operators. So when things started going haywire, and I needed to put a weapon on a target or some group on the ground who may very well be on horseback had an issue, I could get a quick message to me, right up to me, and boom, and I would have that, and I would go back and forth. We'd choose who the guy was. We'd come out of the orbit, and we'd go in. All of that done on chat. It was done overnight. It was just based upon a way to think about it in 2001, and it caught on from there. So those are the kind of pieces that we did. So we had complete situational awareness. Everybody saw the same picture, and that's how we did businesses from that. Adding that to links, and we put links together, and we dropped bombs that way and did a lot of the different pieces there. So that can be in a combat or a non-combat environment. You see that today in the office. I think it's called, what is it called on Microsoft tool? That's right. That you have in your tool there to use them. A lot of folks in my office area use that, and they go back and forth and do that. So that's another example of that. But please go ahead.
Yeah, I love those examples. I think a lot of the technology, if you don't look at an enterprise, but if you look at what cities are doing today in the smart city space, and you could easily tie that into military-based technology. So I won't dwell on the same use cases. But one that we're seeing a lot lately is folks are getting more and more into purpose-built devices. So when you get into healthcare and you get into these things, and they want to minimize cost, and so what we've seen is a lot of companies come in with these expensive purpose-built devices that cost thousands of dollars, and it's like, I don't know if I can make that work. What we're seeing more and more of is folks using device mobility and management to actually create a purpose-built image on, say, a tablet. So the same tablet you might buy someone, you can now turn around in the healthcare industry and say, hey, I'm going to give my patient this tablet, but I'm actually going to lock it down so it's specifically used for healthcare. And
So
this
software
one,
defined.
absolutely, yeah.
It's a virtualized, it's a standard commercial device with a virtualization. Is that what you're looking at?
Yeah, exactly.
Like a software-defined something,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, and it's helped reduce costs for a lot of businesses today, as they can go out and you buy in bulk and you say, hey, this section of tablets, for example, we're gonna use them for this purpose, and we're gonna lock them down for this purpose, and it really helps in that space.
We did that in the Pentagon last week on tablets, for example. We came to 3 devices, or is it 2 devices, one of the 2, but we bought a group of those for the Wi-Fi piece that Mr. Conway's putting together in there, so that we had a standardized group out there. Why? Because it takes manpower to reset all the devices, et cetera. So we went with a 2 standard or 3 standardized devices. I can't remember, Randy, what
Yeah,
it
I mean,
was. But that's an
kiosks
example.
used to cost thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Now you slap a tablet up there, put something on it, and you got
fair.
self-service, whatever, you need.
In that B2 example, I used Dell laptops. Why? Because they wanted $1,800 at that time for that laptop. Why? So I had some other ones that were very nice laptops, but I didn't care, because every 12 months I threw them away. And I could still buy 10 laptops for the cost of a hard-built laptop. So we did it from that perspective as well. Please, go on.
Yeah, so I'll maybe just extend on both of what they said too. So it's about, what I'd liked most to see more implemented inside military health that is being implemented at various sites externally, and to some degree actually we're already doing inside the DoD, is around collaboration analytics and then the extension of the platform like you suggested. So I'm also a sleep doc. We would have a sleep study cost about $3,000 per sleep study. If you come in and get a sleep study with me, you typically will get 2 back-to-back nights that I waste your time with your family to come in and get hooked up to a bunch of wires, as opposed to a lot of devices now that are hooked to your mattress and your pillow or even around your wrist that give me just enough information, maybe not as good as the sleep study, but to know whether or not you need that $3,000 disruption to your life. As an example, EKG machines, ultrasounds, extensions of the actual mobile phones themselves to do some of these things that previously would require a $2,000 EKG machine, for example, that doesn't require.
So let me ask you this, if we used my very early example of giving every soldier a phone, if they had a rash or something, could they take a picture of it and send it to you?
Yeah, so I was just, absolutely, especially on dermatology. There's a real use case around dermatology. Ophthalmology is another field that typically does that. Telestroke is actually another very good use case there. I was up in Boston a couple weeks ago, and a startup company was doing exactly what you're saying, where the analytics on the phone were enough to actually trace out and identify the degree of rash, the area of the rash, calculated over time to see if it's growing or shrinking, and provide context around the depth just by placing a little quarter next to it. So absolutely. The other is collaboration, like you talked about. So as a young trainee in neurology when I was at Walter Reed 10 plus years ago now, it was very common, uncommon in the commercial side as much maybe, but if I had an ENT question, I go across the hall with the patient and I say, hey, can you take a look at this patient of mine? I'm seeing him for this neurology thing. I don't think it's a neurology thing. I think it might be an ENT thing. Can we work through it? But that was because of a convenience factor that ENT was co-located to neurology right next to us at Walter Reed. But now imagine the scenario of an extension of mobile platform. We are 24/7 in healthcare. I can access a dermatologist 24/7 a day somewhere around the globe, all right? and so can our patients. What our patients should be able to. And so, and there's actually congressional legislation that allows us to do some of that information unique to the military that even the commercial side can't take advantage of. And then last was the analytics piece, and the piece I used to identify that is we are very good at collecting data in healthcare. Yeah. And in general, data in the military, and yet the analytics piece has been sorely lacking in many respects. And this was really brought to my attention sharply when I was managing a project up at the research lab at Fort Detrick, and we had a group come in who I'll leave the name out probably in this room, but who said, you know, we do missile defense stuff, and we think we might be able to help you in healthcare. We're very good at taking things over complex terrain and readjusting trajectory to put hot metal on target. And we think we can do the same to keeping the same kind of algorithm for waveform data out of a ventilator pump in an ICU to maintain exactly the kind of reading that you need within a health parameters for a patient on a ventilator in an ICU. And that just sort of blew my mind. I think there's this sort of analytics piece in another vertical market within DoD that could be applied to the healthcare market. And it was one of my first real wake-up calls to the reality of that situation that we're facing in health IT today.
You know what's interesting is I was going to mention this. Gartner at the beginning of the year gave all of its U.S. employees a Fitbit on my mind. And they're gathering the data together and using it to do the health part of what you talked about.
So a similar project in the Army, actually, that's going on under an initiative called the Performance Triad Initiative that General Horaho and the Army Surgeon General has initiated with help of the line, giving them Fitbits, addressing what information we're seeing. Now, the problem with that, from my perspective, is that one of the potential problems is longevity of using those devices, and there's been lots of studies done to look at that. But also, you know, I can order somebody to have a Fitbit, right, in the military. So my argument to them is, you know what, I'll know we're successful with Fitbits and the wearable devices when it's the spouse who's recommending it, right? Not when it's the commander who's recommending it, right? And so, and the reality is, because when it comes to health, it's the spouse who is the commander, who's the unit commander, right, when it comes to health. And because they make the decisions on where we're going to eat, where we're going over the weekend, where we're going on vacation, what we're doing with the family tonight when you get home.
Well, maybe you don't even need a Fitbit. I mean, today's Samsung phones will do it.
Well, that was my comment about mobility, is redefining what we mean by mobility and to include this broad spectrum of not just tablets and iPhones and Samsungs and such, but really the broad spectrum of things that are going to be much more internalized and personal to us. You can take my phone now, but I suspect that the future of mobility are going to be things you can't take from me anymore.
Yeah. Well, when you get into that point, though, when you start talking about changing devices, or you go from a wearable to a mobile phone, you start talking healthcare as well. You got to make sure that you can tie all the information back to the same patient, so that you're not, you know, confusing.
So you know, the elephant in the room on that is PII and PHI, and we heard a little bit of a discussion of that. But the thing I like to remind people is that the P in HIPAA stands for portability, not privacy or protection, right? And it's that portability component that is important. And if you, now I am a huge advocate of health privacy. For those who know me in healthcare, and I see a few in the audience here, know that I'm a huge proponent of patient privacy rights, and because I'm a neurologist, which is like the socially acceptable psychiatrist. So, you know, I get it. But on the same token, a large portion of my patient panel is more than willing to share their information if they think it's going to improve their health care.
We had a discussion prior as a commander with over 10,000 people, one unit, 6,000 another, about 4 another. That was one of my big issues, the privacy versus portability. It's a balance across the board, because I'm trying to get them the best health care. I did want to give one quick example of last week. I was out cutting trees in Michigan last week, and so I have a place up in the UP and Upper Peninsula, and I'm cutting, you know, and it's a tick-infested area there. And I ended up getting a few on me, and I missed one on my arm. So it bit into me, got it, you know. So I just took a picture of it. I sent it to the flight surgeon. I had a prescription in an hour because, it's not looking good. So why don't you go ahead and take some antibiotics. Within an hour, it was sitting at the local place in Michigan. I went and picked up the prescription and started taking there, and it was done. That was all done literally.
So let me, if I could, sir, just to push a little bit.
So I just gave him some privacy data. I had a tick infestation.
No, not at all. Not at all on the privacy. That's your prerogative. It's more about the fact that that is concierge medicine. That is VIP healthcare. Yeah, that is a 3-star with a flight surgeon. You know, and so what about my young enlisted?
So let me go backwards. As an aviator, I've always as a flight surgeon for an aviator, we've always had that relationship.
Absolutely, on the line.
So I don't care if I was a lieutenant or whatever else. We would have that so they could keep you healthy, so you could go back and fly. Absolutely. But I think that matters as if you're in a base. I would argue that at any of the bases I was at, my young airmen that are in there could talk to their PCM. And I'll give an example of one of my kids actually got hurt while we were there, called the PCM up right away, accepted into the doctor's office within about 3 minutes. And he's a 13-year-old little boy that they don't know, and he actually goes to the Army. They don't know me from the hole in the ground. So from that perspective, I think it exists and it lives. In this case, I've had the same flight surgeon for a couple of years because I've been there, and it's the same idea.
That's where I want to get to in healthcare. You know, you talk about sort of what's right and wrong. I see beautiful examples of that even in my own practice.
Yep.
I mean, patients with my cell phone number say, look, you call me. You know, if there's an issue with this and you need to call me, you call me any time of day. But the infrastructure, and this gets back to sort of an infrastructure security concerns that may or may not be appropriately placed, is how do we allow that, you know, across the spectrum of the care that we deliver across the globe in all environments. And that's where it gets a little complicated. We're doing it amazingly well on some of the
Here's what
line
will
side.
motivate it. Gardner pays $38 for one of those video events with a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
That's so much cheaper than everything else that it's going to drive the use case.
Yeah.
Right?
Fair.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah, and I even say, you know, I can say, so I have some luxury in my clinic, particularly when I was at Pensacola doing things with the flight community there.
Yeah.
So I'll spend an hour with that patient because that hour I'm going to spend with them, I'll know everything about their family, I'll know their dog's name, and by God, that's going to prevent that ER visit next week. You know, instead of the 5-minute appointment. But we're not quite there yet, even as a healthcare industry, not just DoD healthcare, but as a healthcare industry.
That's fair. Okay. Let me jump to the next question, please.
So the 2 questions on acquisition. So I commend you on your comment about the desire to build true partnerships with industry. All speakers today, including Terry Halverson, have said the same thing. However, what is being done to ensure that the acquisition community embraces the same concept? Contracting officers often push contracts that do not develop partnerships, shut down communications with PM users prior to release of the RFP or throughout the award. How can we build a partnership when a critical component of the partnership does not embrace industry as a partner?
So I can take that for the Navy side. That's why we have an IPT. We had a summit last October because Admiral Branch sensed that there were several pilots, mobile initiatives going on that we needed to get our arms wrapped around for that very reason. What are we spending? You know, when we went through the IT efficiency drill 3 years ago and started this, and now we have sequestration, it really forced us to understand what we got and consolidate where it makes sense to consolidate. Mobility is no different. So, you know, how does that play into where we really need to go? So we have this IPT. We had the summit in October. We determined that there was probably 15 to 18 different pilots going on. So we had a series of speakers that kind of gave their initiative. Admiral Richardson was there from the AFCEA 8. They're doing a lot of work with tablets in reactor spaces, all on subs, the carriers. We had the afloat give a brief. We had the Res 4 guys give a brief. They're doing a lot of stuff for the selective reserves that need access to information while they're on home or on travel. So how do we do that? We had to prioritize. We have a top 5 list inside the Navy right now of what we think are the mobility initiatives that are going on. How does it relate to that question? When it comes time to POM for something from a mobility perspective, we need to be able to tell the resource sponsor and the money folks, this is our list. And you know, obviously there's competing priorities, but in terms of mobility, where do we want to spend our dollars? I'm an acquisition guy simply because I work for PEO EIS. I happen to be the chair for the mobility IPT, so I have some influence there based on fleet feedback, where we need to focus our energy on. Marty Brown, sitting in the third row here, is having an offsite in San Diego in a couple weeks, primarily to talk about the shore mobility way ahead. That's going to have significant impact on where we spend our dollars and what we acquire. So my long answer is we have to get our arms wrapped around the department and where we're going in terms of mobility. That's why I talked about the strategy. What is our end game? That, in effect, will mitigate a lot of these onesie-twosie pilots, and you're looking at things holistically and enterprise-wide, which is what really you all care about from a dollars perspective and what we're buying our money on for mobility. So that's where the Department of the Navy is coming from.
Let me add 2 points because it's important. We have a department strategy. When I say department, we have to be careful. There's Department of the Navy and Department of DoD, so I'll play that. There's a DoD strategy. There's a DoD implementation plan. The Navy, Department of the Navy, is also doing an implementation plan for the service, which is a very important piece.
To DoD.
Yeah, which aligns all the way up. So there's multiple layers in there to get to what we need to. Theirs is even newer, so it's building upon what we learned on ours. Our strategy, I would argue, is probably almost getting outmoded when it was finished because we learned so much during that strategy build and the implementation plan. So that's one important point. The other piece I want to throw out there, this industry partnership, we've been doing a lot in the OSD side. I say a lot more than we have in the past. A lot's probably an exaggeration. A lot more than we have in the past. There's a factor of trust, folks, that we have to build between this. I did all the stuff on the spectrum piece for a long time, and we built a lot, especially between the telecons in there. And it was based upon trust on both teams. Trying to work through that, and we got to the right solution. We worked together to talk to Congress about what we needed. We talked about that, and that goes back to contracting laws, that goes back to acquisition pieces. There are some changes that we have to do as a nation if we're going to stay competitive and kicking butt across the world. And I'm talking about in industry, kicking butt, and I'm talking about in the military side. So there are some changes, but it's going to be trust, and litigation gets in the way of that sometimes, so we have to be careful of that. So I think that's something that's going to have to build upon people in dealing with each other. I think you're going to see that more in the future because I think that's the only way we're going to get ahead. We did it in the 40s. We did it very well. We did it in the 50s, if you will, and I think we got away from that over time. The threat was different then, and I think the threat's building up enough now where we're going to have to do that again. So I throw that out to you. I think that's a big piece of it, that both groups have to come together and have a bit of trust so we can work together, because I think it's in both interests to do that in that particular arena. So I throw it back. Comments at all? I know I'll throw that to I'm going to throw it to the non-Dr. Steve because of the Verizon aspect, because you provide a different perspective than many of the others do.
As far as the acquisition question?
And the contracting in that particular aspect.
Yeah, I think from our point of view, it works well for the items that we have, stuff that we're able to sell. I think where there could be some assistance in that regard is when we have new technologies and we're out trying to develop other things, there's some restrictions sometimes what can and can't be sold, and then those items have to go through the same process. So it'd be nice if at a certain point, if there's trusted partners, that there's maybe some sort of a fast track or way that you could secure and bring new items to the table without having to kind of go through that first step all over again.
So that's an issue we're working through. That's good. Okay. No, he's working it. Go ahead.
Okay, so I guess again to the govies here. So what are the tactical apps, I'm calling them the killer apps, that would be useful to extend mobility to the edge environments?
God, there's so many. I mean, okay, I'll tell you, when I worked on the first tablet computer back in 1989, when I was part of Grid Systems, I was the marketing guy, and I just built this little brochure, and all I did was I had sheets of paper on the ground with my tablet on top of it. The very first thing you can do if you're looking for great applications, just ask whoever you want to ask to bring forth all those little pieces of paper that they fill out. Paper's horrible, right? You can't read it, right? How many of our names were changed by census takers over the years by somebody who couldn't read somebody else's handwriting, right? I mean, paper is the enemy. Get it digital as quickly as you can and send it through the system in digital format. Will be translated, et cetera. That's easy. If you want some more specifics, inspectors are great uses of tablet computers. There's applications where you can use business intelligence to make better decisions on things. Again, distributing information. One is collecting information, one's distributing information. And you talked later about all these stack of documents you had to carry on the plane. What mobility has taught us is that the younger generation, they don't read documentation anymore, right? They just pick something up and use it, right? Your kids probably don't read documentation. So yet we keep publishing all this stuff and they never use it. So I've heard, in one of my Aviation Week and Space Technology magazines, that the military is trying to figure out how to get people to use weapons without reading documentation.
That scares
Okay.
me. All right, so there you go.
So maybe mobility is saying, so maybe when we start writing documentation, it's a symptom of complexity. What mobility has taught us more than anything is we got to make things Apple iPhone easy, so to speak. So maybe that's one of the great lessons we've learned.
Extension there might be, apps that where they don't need a doctor,
Yeah, there we go.
right?
You're talking self-medication, self-aid buddy care almost. In
Yeah,
a sense.
absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
Well, it's real time. I mean, you
Same-
got the ability to tell people what to do
That's
real
right.
time.
So, but this is a great question, though, right? Because you gave a ton of use cases in a matter of minutes that were just fantastic, and cross-correlating the weapons capability to something in the medical field. This is where we really need industry's help, because we realize to a certain degree what an apps can do for us, but we need you to tell us the rest of the story, because quite often, let's just look at the applications that we own today. How effectively do we use them? Do we use them to the fullest extent?
No.
We have a capability gap. We don't take the time to look to see if there's an application that fulfills that gap. We jump to the next solution to band-aid or put a band-aid on that hole that we got. But we don't realize to the fullest extent what we really can use it for. It goes back to that R word, requirements. Where do we want to go in mobility, and then where do we want to go with accessing that information? Halverson talked about it today. It's not about the devices per se, it's about accessing that vital information that we need to access. So what is our data strategy? How does it converge with mobility? And oh, by the way, cloud is right around the corner for us. Those three, that triangle right there between data strategy, cloud, and mobility, how are they going to interact in the future to access those vital applications that we need? We got to understand the requirement and what kind of information it is we're after. We can have use cases all day, obviously, which is going to drive the applications that we develop. But I'm concerned that we're just going to be developing applications for the sake of developing applications. We already have an issue with managing apps now. That's why we have FAMs. But we're going to have to legitimize that in the mobility world as we move forward.
But I think we got to emphasize, we got to collect it digitally as quickly as we can. Get it off the analog format onto digital,
Right.
and then we can use it with reliability.
One of the things that I hear talked about a lot, but I don't always see in practice that might be beneficial as we work in is there's so many apps, and a lot of these apps get purpose-built, and then it gets very frustrating for folks when they try to figure out how to tie them all together. And a lot of times, if you just get people talking, and somebody walks in with a really fantastic app, and they're using it for dermatology, and you get a couple people's insight from a few other pillars or branches of the military, and you're like, you know what, I could use it to do X. It's a lot simpler to have that company just add that feature than the next company that walks in and solves that very one specific problem, and then down the road you're trying to tie that app with that app with that app, and then it creates all kinds of issues.
Well, and let's not forget, then it becomes a resource problem. Who's managing that application? Who's updating with any kind of vulnerability associated with it? So it becomes a management problem as well. That's what we're actually experiencing today.
That's a key thing. You got to be careful that somebody doesn't solve an immediate problem where they save time but create a huge amount of extended time on the back end because you aren't prepared to. You got to look at things as systems, right? You got to look at the whole thing. You can't just do mobile by itself. Mobile is part of an overall entity. We like to say mobile is an adjective, not a noun, meaning that it makes everything better, right, by putting it through test cases, but it should never stand alone by itself.
Yeah.
The best app for me is one that doesn't just contain information. The example I guess I give is I can remember as a med student walking into the medical bookstore and seeing this big book about that thick. It was red, and I remember it very vividly. It said the heart, and I thought, probably everything that we need to know about the heart is probably going to be in that, for it to speak to your pilot sort of manuals. And in neurology, there is no book called the brain. Okay, and so the word doctor means to teach. Dr. Google is a pretty good teacher, actually. And I can tell you that oftentimes it's not about me having the information on a particular app. It's about having access to that information that's context aware. And the best kind of information for me
gets updated, right?
Gets to me when I need it. At the time of need, at the time of greatest need. And right now, it's not. I have a ton of apps on my phone that are medically related for me to do my own practice of neurology. Largely around pharmacy scripts, et cetera. There's so much information about flying the human body.
How much documentation is sitting out there where the pages have been shipped up to update them?
Yeah.
It says replace page 5 through 7 with these pages, and nobody does it. And the good news about electronic books now, they're always kept up to date, right?
That's the flying aspect too. Go ahead, another question?
So I guess we have two questions about the use of mobile apps in classified spaces and unclassified spaces. But Mr. Halverson said he can talk secret at the baseball game and described an example, but yet we
I was
can't.
at the baseball game, he was talking to me. Okay, go ahead.
Was he using signals from the pitcher?
Go ahead.
But we can't use wireless devices in SCIFs.
So Mark, so I know where you're going with this because, I just spoke at another security panel for the traditional security community, and the most questions we got from the audience was, why can't I take my mobility device in a classified space? Or what can I do with it? There's certain restrictions. And Ken and I were actually talking about this for 30 minutes earlier this morning. It's not really an applications issue. It's a functionality, emanation, near classified systems, those kind of things. And what I'll tell you, from Dan Del Grosso's perspective, I think it's overrated. Now, that's not to say you should be able to use mobility anywhere in controlled room. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is we need to have a revised wireless policy for the department that specifically gives criteria on what you have to be looking for, from power to RF to what's in the space to what's the true risk. Because every time something comes out, a Fitbit, an iWatch, whatever it is, we're going to be chasing our tail. And by the way, I think Admiral Branch wears an iWatch. I'm pretty sure he does. But my point is, we're going to be chasing our tail on every device. We have certain situations in the Navy today where the new laptops, we used to have that Wi-Fi circuit board that you could put in the Wi-Fi card. Now they come with the toggle switch. So we have a lot of telework folks. We have a lot of folks go on travel. But there's certain command security managers throughout the Navy that are gun shy about allowing laptops in classified spaces. I'm not talking about SCIFs. SSO Navy says no mobile devices in SCIFs, including laptops. Okay, got it. But let's look at the collateral, secret and below. Can you have a laptop in a space? What are the risks? So there's that toggle switch on the back. The question was, even in the off position, it's still emanating. Okay, we did a Tempest check. No, it's not. And when you turn it on and you actually dock it on the network, it doesn't matter if that toggle switch is on or off. But the question remains is, what is the risk? And that's really what we have to drill down into. Instead of saying no, we need to figure out how to say yes. And being able to say yes means understand the true risk. We actually had a lady who came to us at the end of that conference. She said, I'm basically partially deaf. She has to wear a hearing aid. She works in a SCIF. That hearing aid comes with Bluetooth capability. They told her she actually has to take the hearing aid completely off to work in the SCIF. Now, what does that do for her ability to do her job? What's wrong with this, by the way? It doesn't need to work if the Bluetooth is out in her locker. She can still take the earplug in and use it. But it's that mentality that we have to work through that says, look at the whole picture and understand the true risk of wireless in general when you're talking about working in sensitive controlled spaces throughout the department.
So let me add to that. That's changing right now fairly rapidly. And I know Randy Conway's in there, and he's actually helping write some of that particular aspect with Richard Hale to include the SCIF space. So that will not be the policy of the Department of Defense within a year, what you just heard on the SCIF space as far as mobile devices. So that's changing. A lot of things are occurring in that particular arena. We talk about outside of a classified arena taking a phone call, there is some assumed risk. You have to accept that risk, and you have to do that. But think of it this way. Would you want, if the president got a phone call, let's say he happened to be at a baseball game, and it was a very important phone call, would you want him to answer the question on a secure device, or would you want him to talk around it on a non-secure device? There's your two risk scenarios right there. I want him on that secure device, okay? Because there is a risk about people around him, but if it's perishable data that needs to be made at that particular time, that's an important piece, okay? That's an actual use case discussion that went on when we made some of the risk calculations and how we do business in that particular arena. So what you're seeing is a very large change in DoD and how we think about those devices. And that's predicated by those risk assessments being done by NSA. And that's what their job is to do, is to build those pieces out from the mobility piece. So they're helping pioneer those things to make sure that we have that right. Now, they don't get to make the final decision. That's done at the OSD level. They tell us the risk, going right back to the discussion that Dan just had here right there. Then we make the discussion on risk, okay? There's a productivity piece, there's a risk piece to this, and there's just a capability from a cost perspective. What's that right balance of all three of those, okay? Now, I'm going to put one more thing, and then I'll jump into the next question. Keep in mind, if I'm over in Uzbekistan or one of the stands, if you will, or on some other part of the world, I still have to use these mobile devices. So I need some redundancy and resiliency. So when you're thinking about that, don't think of just the Washington, D.C. area and how good we have it here as far as the multiple capabilities from the different ways of fiber going all around there. I need that same device to go with me, and it has to go to some place, godforsaken place in the world full of holes in the ground, and that to be able to do this kind of stuff. So keep that in mind when you're thinking of mobility. We're going to use that device there as well. So that's a bigger piece to it. We want to use that same off-the-shelf device to do the business that we do in different places. So it's got to have some resiliency, some redundancy. I'm talking networks now, not necessarily device. So I just throw that out there when you're thinking through this as an industry. Go.
Okay, so how can DoD develop or innovate the latest COTS apps that are being developed by what they call digital natives? So I think the question refers to that because of our security posture are not taking advantage of the latest commercial apps. So what can be done
Well,
to increase that?
you can't have both. I mean, if you have something that's highly secure, it needs to be protected, it needs to be developed internally with your right controls. But, you know, in the non-tactical areas, we want to take advantage of things. I think what you want to do is have a way in which people can use these things, bring it to a body that looks at them for their integrity and other impacts, and have a process by which they get to review them and accept them, right? I mean, that's the right way to do it. Don't look at it as an app prevention committee, but as an app enablement committee. So it's the attitude of the committee to do it. But you got to have somebody that looks at these things, because you just can't take everything.
Yeah, and you got to be consistent too. I mean, you got to pick something and run with it, because in the environment you guys operate in, you'd have to wrap that, and then you could drop it in a container, like Ken was mentioning in his opening remarks, where you could say, hey, if everyone loves Link, you know, then we can actually wrap that and make it secure so everybody could use it.
Yeah.
But you can't. It's just probably not realistic to think you can use, you know, tens and hundreds of those types of apps.
But you have to have a process,
Yeah.
and make sure it's not a preventative process.
Yeah. Okay.
So last question to Dr. Steve here. So would it be worthwhile for DoD to develop a separate health network that would empower mobile applications to the
I'll
cloud?
answer no.
Yeah,
It ain't happening, folks. It's
I
going to
agree
be one
100%.
network that's already decided. Go, please, Steve.
What's your-
Dr. Steve, after I
what's
said
your
that.
answer?
Yeah, boy, talk about you're asking the doc, so not the CIOs at the table. Has a long history.
It does.
And there's, even on the research side, we have
Investment or
DDRE
maintenance.
and our entirely separate sort of researchy network. The challenge that we have in healthcare is there are already these external networks in healthcare that we absolutely have to connect to. We are congressionally mandated and required to connect to. So for example, VA is the classic one, but Social Security Administration is another one for disability determination. We are congressionally mandated to interact with those. There is efforts underway, started in 2004, to create a nationwide health information network, of which DoD was mandated along with 20 other federal partners to participate. So we have the challenge of there are policies in play inside DoD that are established through history and precedent, and yet I have other mandates that require me to connect to other outside networks that don't play well with the DoD network. And so, so you know, we again, as the chair of the Interim Solution Committee, we find the way to do it in a way that's going to protect the information of our community. The example I give to our federal partners who don't get it when I talk to them about this is, look, you know, our information is just different, especially even in the health space. If you aggregate a certain amount of health information, it becomes classified. I'm sorry, you know, and it does. And you can tell what part of the world someone might be deploying to based on a look at the unit's health history. And so it's just a little different environment that requires the kind of oversight that the DoD networks and security posture provide us. But at the same time, it provides some amount of leniency and understanding on the part of the DoD CIO side that we have other requirements and mandates to take care of our beneficiaries that require us to connect to these other networks.
Anything you create needs maintenance, and that's often forgotten. So don't create unless you really have to.
Yeah, all Dr. Steve's comments were very fair, because this was a big emotional piece for it, but there was a taxpayer cost to it, but there's also a security side that DoD can provide, and then being able to connect to those outside agencies, you know, through protected DMZs in that particular arena was a very big piece of it. I think in the end game, healthcare portability, which to me is the critical piece for a fight, if you will be better if we do this correctly. From putting this in the same networks, if you will. They'll have more security involvement in there, and they'll have more uptime, if you will, and bandwidth, which they need for some of their systems. If you've ever gone into a doctor's office and used Alta, I think of that nightmare system, and if you will, and I look at the doctor's frustration, I think, oh my God. So that's just one perspective. We're done on the questions, it looks like. Is that correct, Mark?
Yes, sir.
I want to make one comment. I'll let these guys make one final point. It was an Australian who was my deputy in a combat operation that really brought up the piece that he talked about the U.S. And he was trying to, you know, he was married to a U.S. person and everything else. He was trying to explain to the U.S. and he'd gotten so used to me because I was around the Brits that he kind of thought of me as like one of them. And he said, the Americans, you know, you got to kick them 100 times. It's like some giant monster that you got to kick to wake up. But once you get them woke up, they don't stop, and you can't get him to stop. And that was his perspective on that particular piece of it. And I think that's where in a microcosm DoD is right now on the mobility piece. I don't think people realize in the last year and a half-ish, Randy, how much change has occurred and how fast these policies are starting to come out. They are now to a point where we think we got our arms around what is the required security, answering his question, what kind of apps you want to have. And by the way, this is a never-ending journey. So don't take that wrong in any manner, shape, or form. And actually, a bit of the healthcare piece I think we've got, and what a relationship needs to be as far as public-private partnerships with industry. That's starting to come out in policies rather quickly, whether we use devices in SCIFs, whether you use devices other places, and that's the piece that I want you guys to walk away with, because I think this is going to even go faster and faster and faster and faster. I'm being given the hook. I want to make sure there's any last comments there, if you want to make anything.
Moving forward, on NMCR, our largest network, we deployed thousands of smartphone technology, smartphones on a network in record time, less than 4 months. It was with a concentrated effort from all parties concerned. Once the strategy is signed on 1 August, what I'm probably going to get to do is grab some industry partners at random, probably less than 10, in a room. Come to me not with your solutions, but with your consulting hat on, and tell us, based on the strategy and where we're at on both the afloat and ashore, what is the best way forward collectively from you all so that we can work hand in hand, moving forward, doing the right thing. That's all I got.
Ken?
I would say I commend you for challenging yourself to think differently. I think you've got to solve this security issue. If you don't, mobility will never happen. You've got to solve that. But I certainly would commend you for what you've done so far.
Okay. I'm sorry, I was going to say this Steve, as in Verizon Steve.
No, I just want to say thanks for the opportunity to get up here and speak.
Thank you for coming.
And I'll give the time to the doctor so we can get moving.
Dr. Steve.
How much time do I have? No, it's easy. No, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to everyone. Help us get better and to recognize that the healthcare space tends to be a little bit unique in that most of our data actually doesn't exist in DoD networks. 60 to 70% of our patients are seen on the outside and they exist in other people's networks. But help us get better. Help us deliver better care to the beneficiary pool that deserves it the most.
If you got no other message, I think Dr. Steve said it well. We need your help in getting this better. And it's to your benefit to make it better from both a taxpayer perspective, from a nation perspective, as well as from a capitalist perspective. So help us get better, be a partner with us, and move forward with this. And that's what I'm asking from you, and that's all. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, General Wheeler and the panel. Just some housekeeping, folks. We're going to take a bit of a break. 2:45, we're going to start up again. And I'd just like to remind you to get your passports stamped at the Technology Council showcase outside, if you could. But 2:45, we're going to start up again. Thank you.